Hello friends, have you ever truly looked at your own hand? I mean really looked at it, not just as a tool to grip or to hold, but as a map, a mysterious, intricate map of lines and creases, unique to you in all of creation. We trace these lines in idle moments, wondering what they mean. Cultures across time have tried to decipher them, seeking glimpses of the future, of fortune, of fate. But what if the secret they hold is not about what? A story of a divine design, a tragic deviation, and a heroic rescue. What if, etched into your very flesh, is the echo of a promise from the one who crafted you? The truth is, your hand is a testament. It is a scroll upon which is written a portion of the greatest story ever told. And it begins not with you, but with the hands that shaped the cosmos. Before there was time, before there was light. And in that workshop, the universe was conceived not as a chaotic accident, but as a masterpiece of divine engineering. When the scriptures say God spoke, and it was so, do not imagine a simple, detached command. Imagine the voice of a master craftsman whose every word is imbued with purpose, with structure, with breathtaking detail. He spoke with breath. He spoke the firmament, and in that word was the precise balance of atmosphere, the weight of clouds, the chemistry of the air we breathe. This was not just power, it was art. And like any great artist, God delighted in the details. He didn't just create plants. He designed the microscopic architecture of a single leaf, the precise spiral of a pinecone. You were not an afterthought, you were the centerpiece. The artist decided to create something in his own image, a being capable of love, of reason, of creativity, of relationship. A being that would bear his signature, and to house this signature, he became not just an architect, but a sculptor. The scriptures say he formed man from the dust of the ground. Picture that, the hands of the Almighty. He shaped the clay, molding the form, breathing into it the breath of life. And in that moment, Adam became a living soul. Every part of him was a reflection of this meticulous design. A heart designed to beat in rhythm with the Creator. A mind designed to comprehend His majesty. Hands designed to work, to create, to tend the garden, to reach out and connect with his Creator and his companion. His heartline was pure communion with God. His headline was unclouded wisdom. It was a map leading to a life of endless purpose and joy. This concept of a divine blueprint is woven throughout the entire story of my people. It was not just for the first man, but for the nation he would call his own. When he rescued the Israelites from Egypt, he didn't just set them free into the wilderness to want the law, the 10 Commandments, the intricate instructions for building the tabernacle. Many see these laws as restrictive, as a list of don'ts, but they are the schematics for a flourishing life. They were the lines drawn on them, the map of a new nation, designed to lead them to prosperity, justice, then peace. Think of the tabernacle. God didn't just say, "Build me a tabernacle, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn." He even named the chief artisan, Bezalel, and have filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and with all kinds of skills. Why such detail? Because God cares about the details. The tabernacle was to be a microcosm of his heavenly dwelling, a place where his perfection could meet humanity's imperfection, every piece of a case. It was a physical blueprint of a spiritual reality. This is the heart of the Creator. He is a God of order, of beauty, of intention. Nothing is random. Nothing is meaningless. The path of a river, the migration of a bird, the intricate dance of the planets, it all follows a design. And so do you, the unique combination of talents you possess, the passions that burn out. The lines on your palm are a symbol of this personal, intentional design, a reminder that you were not mass-produced, you were handcrafted. You were sculpted from the dust and breathed into by God Himself. Your life has a purpose, a blueprint laid out by the one who knows you better than you know yourself. But as we all know, blueprints can be ignored. Maps can be discarded. And the story of those perfect lines on a place of perfect harmony. The man and the woman walked with God in the cool of the day. There was no shame, no fear, no division. Their hands were open, receiving everything they needed from their Creator. The blueprint was simple: trust and obey. Dwell in this garden, in this love, tend this garden, enjoy this communion. But then a voice, a whisper, entered the garden, a voice of serpentine, that the map he had drawn was not for their benefit, but for his control. The whisper pointed to a tree, the one tree whose fruit was forbidden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The voice suggested that God's boundary was not a protection, but a prison, that he was afraid they would become like him. That he was afraid they would become like him. And isn't that the oldest lie? The lie that we can be our own gods, that we can seize control. That hand, designed for fellowship and stewardship, became a hand of grasping, of taking what was not given. She took the fruit and ate, and she gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate. In that moment of rebellion, the blueprint was smudged. The perfect lines on their palms were fractured. A tremor went through all of creation. The communion was broken, and they realized they were naked. Their hands, once open, now scrambled to stitch fig leaves together to cover their shame. They became hands of hiding, of self-preservation. When God walked in the garden, his voice was not the gentle invitation it once was, but a question that echoed through the now shadowed trees, "Where are you?" It was the cry of a heartbroken father whose children had run from his presence, and the consequences of that work, once a joyful act of co-creation with God, became toil. Childbirth, a miracle of life, became a thing of pain. And death, an intruder in God's perfect world, began its reign. The lines on their hands now told a different story. The lifeline was no longer eternal, it had an end. The heartline was no longer eternal, it had an end, the hearted by confusion. And this story of the smudged blueprint of hands that grasp instead of receive did not end with Adam and Eve. It became the story of humanity. Their firstborn son, Cain, was a farmer. Abel was a farmer. Abel was a shepherd. Both brought offerings to the Lord. God looked with favor on Abel's offering, but not on Cain's. The scripture doesn't say why, but it hints at the attitude of the heart. Cain's, he warned him, "Sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." It was a chance to choose a different path, to straighten the line. But Cain did not listen. He led his brother into a field. And there, the hands that were meant to till the soil were raised against his own flesh and blood. Cain's hand was now stained, not just with dirt, but he was a fugitive, a restless wanderer on the earth, forever disconnected from the ground that had received his brother's blood. His life's map was now one of exile and alienation. The story continues. Humanity multiplied, and so did their rebellion. They looked at their own hands, at their own abilities, and thought they could build a tower that would reach the heavens. The Tower of Babel. It was a monument to humanity, but God saw their arrogance. He saw that their unity was not for his glory, but for their own. And so he confused their language, scattering them across the face of the earth. Their grand project, their self-made map to heaven, fell into ruin. The lines of communication were broken. The lines of communication were broken. The lines of community were shattered. Humanity was lost, wandering. We are born with a longing for the garden, for the original blueprint, but we are also born with a tendency to draw our own maps, to trust our own hands. We grasp for control, we hide in our shame, we build our own towers of pride. The lines on our palms tell this story of struggle, the story of a divine design marred by human choice, a story of a divine design marred by human choice. The master artist had not thrown away his marred masterpiece. Even in the darkness of exile, a new plan was unfolding. A plan to provide a new map. A plan to send guides who could help a lost people find their way home in the midst of the confusion after the scattering from Babel. God chose one man. Abram, he called him out of the city of Ur. A center, and from Babel, God chose one man. It was a direct counterpoint to the men of Babel, who wanted to make a name for themselves. God was starting over. He was drawing a new line, a new path, through this one man and his descendants. This was the beginning of the age of the age of the prophets. These were men and women who God chose as his mouthpieces. They were not fortune tellers in the mouthpieces. They were not fortune tellers in the raincoat. He stood before the burning bush, hiding his face, afraid to look at God, an 80-year-old shepherd, a murderer in exile, with a stammering tongue. His hands were gnarled from a lifetime of tending sheep in the desert, and God told him, "It is your hands I will use to lead my people out of bondage." Through Moses' hand, holding a simple shepherd's staff, God parted the Red Sea, a highway. On Mount Sinai, God wrote his law not on paper, but on tablets of stone with his own finger. He was rewriting the blueprint for his people, giving them a tangible map to follow. But the people constantly lost their way. They built a golden calf, a god made with their own hands. While Moses was still on the mountain receiving the law, they grumbled, they rebelled, they longed for the slavery of men like Elijah, who called down fire from heaven to challenge the prophets of Baal, proving that the Lord is the one true God. His was a fiery confrontational guidance trying to shock the people back onto the right path. Then came the writing prophets, men who didn't just speak God's word, but wrote it down for future generations. Men like Isaiah, he was given a breathtaking vision of God in the temple, high and exalted. "I am a man of unclean lips." And a seraph flew to him with a live coal from the altar and touched his lips. "See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for." Only then could he be God's messenger. Isaiah's map pointed to both judgment and hope. He warned of the consequences of their rebellion, the coming exile, but he also saw a futuration. He painted a picture of a future king whose government and peace would have no end. He saw the end of the story, the final destination on God's map. Then there was Jeremiah, the weeping prophet. His job was to tell the people of Judah that their beloved city, Jerusalem, would be destroyed. It was a message no one wanted to hear. He was a message no one wanted to hear. He spoke of a new covenant. "The day is coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts." God was promising to move the blueprint from stone tablets to human hearts. The map would become internal, a part of who they are. And Ezekiel, a prophet of bizarre and powerful visions, he saw a valley of dry bones. As he spoke, the bones rattled together. Sinews and flesh appeared on them, and breath entered them. They stood up as a vast army. It was a vivid picture of resurrection, of God's power to bring life out of utter death, to restore a nation that seemed hopelessly lost. These prophets, these divine map readers, were all pointing in the same direction. They were drawing lines on the page of history. They spoke of a king, a servant, a shepherd who would come and finally lead the people home. They were building the suspense. The map of human history was full of dead ends, wrong turns, and impassable mountains. The people had the law, the temple, the prophets, but they still couldn't follow the path. The problem wasn't the map. The problem was the map. The problem wasn't the map. They needed more than a guide. The secret hidden in the lines of every human palm was not a secret of fate, but a secret of need. A need for a hand strong enough to save. And after 400 years of silence, when the prophetic voices had faded and the people waited in tense expectation, a new chapter began. The destination the prophets had pointed to finally appeared on the horizon. The story of hands reaches its climax in a manga, small, helpless, yet containing all the power of the Godhead. These were the hands that the prophets had longed to see. These hands grew. They learned the craft of a carpenter. They held wood and hammers and nails. They were the hands of a worker, a builder. Familiar with splinters and calluses, he was not a distant calluses. He was not a distant king in a palace. He was among the people, a leper, an outcast, a man whose flesh was decaying, whose very presence made others recoil in horror. He approaches Jesus, kneels and says, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." What did Jesus do? He didn't just speak a word from a safe distance. The scripture says he reached out his hand and touched the man, that touched the man, that touched the man, that touched the maid. Jesus' unctual law. It was his own skin, his own flesh, was restored to its original blueprint. These hands touched the eyes of the blind, and they saw the light for the first time. They touched the ears of the deaf, and they heard. They touched feverish bodies, and the sickness fled. They broke 5 loaves and 2 fish, and fed a multitude of 5,000. His hands were hands of creation, of refides of creation, He saw the money changers who had turned the temple. his father's house, into a den of robbers. He didn't just rebuke them. He braided a whip of cords with his own hands and drove them out, overturning their tables, scattering their coins. These were not the hands of a weak, sentimental teacher. They were the hands of a weak, sentimental teacher. They were the hands of a king. He was with his disciples, the men who would soon betray, deny, and abandon him. He knew what was coming. And what did he do? He took off his outer garment, wrapped a towel around his waist, poured water into a basin, and began to wash their feet. The hands of the Creator of the universe were washing the dusty. The hands of the Creator of the universe were washing the dusty. It was not found in being served, but in serving, not in power, but in humility. His hands were showing them the true path, the way of the kingdom. All through his life, his hands were revealing the character of God. They were hands that healed, that provided, that corrected, that served. But their ultimate purpose, the very reason the Word took on flesh and blood and bone, was yet to be. It helps us continue to share these messages of hope and purpose with others who may be searching for their own path. Your support truly makes a difference. Now, let us return to that final fateful journey. The journey to the cross began in a garden. Not the Garden of Eden, but the Garden of Eden, but the Garden of Gethsemane, the place of the oil press. And here, Jesus, the second act, he prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me." It was the cry of his human heart, shrinking from the horror that was to come. But then he submitted his will. "Yet not my will, but yours be done." In this garden, he reversed the choice of the first Adam. Where Adam's hand grasped in rebellion, Jesus' hands opened in surrender. Then they came for him, the ones he had come to save. They led him through a series of mock trials. They struck him with their fists. They spat on him. They pressed a crown of thorns onto his head. And then Pilate, the Roman governor, washed his own hands of the matter, a futile gesture to absolve himself of the guilt of condemning an innocent man. They led him to Golgotha, the place of the skull. They laid him down on a rough wooden cross, and they took a heavy mallet and they stretched out his arm and placed the spike against the palm of his hand. That hand, the hand that had touched the leper, the hand that had blessed the children, the hand that had washed the feet of his disciples. They raised the hammer and brought it down, a sickening sound of metal tearing through flesh and bone. The pain was beyond imagination, but it was more than physical pain. In that moment, something profound of the spirit in the hand that had been. "See, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands." For centuries, my people had understood this as a beautiful metaphor for God's constant remembrance of them. But now, it was becoming a gruesome, literal reality. As that nail pierced his flesh, he was, in a very real sense, engraving us onto his hands. Every sin, every rebellion, every time we had used our hands to grasp the debt of our broken lines was being paid by the breaking of his own body. They lifted the cross, and it dropped into its hole with a jarring thud. He hung there between heaven and earth. He looked down at the soldiers gambling for his clothes. He looked at the mockers, the ones who jeered. He saved others. Let him save himself. And what did he save? He saved others. Let him save himself. And what? They were open, not in a posture of power, but of complete vulnerability and surrender. They were absorbing the full wrath of God against sin. Darkness covered the land. The very creation groaned in agony at the sight of its Creator being crucified. And finally, with a loud cry, he said, "It is finished." He bowed his head and gave up his spirit. "It is finished." He bowed his head and gave. The broken map was redeemed by the blood that flowed from his pierced hands and feet. The story could have ended there. A noble sacrifice. A tragic hero, but that would not be victory. That would just be the end of another tragedy. His body was taken down from the cross, his hands now limp and cold. They wrapped him in linen cloths and laid him in a borrowed tomb. A great stone was rolled over the entrance, but the divine cartographer was drawing one final, impossible line on the map. A line that went straight through death and out the other side. On the third day, the women went to the tomb, their hands carrying spices to anoint a dead body. But the stone was rolled away. The tomb was rolled away. The tomb was empty, An angel told them, "He is not here, in a locked room. It is I myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have." He showed them his hands, and in his palms they saw the wounds, the scars. The nail prints were still there, but they were no longer symbols of shame and defeat. They were trophies of shame and defeat. They were trophies of, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. A week later, Jesus appeared again. He looked directly at Thomas. "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." And Thomas, touching the reality of the resurrected Christ, stopped doubting and believe. And they were the seal of his victory over sin and death. So what does this mean for your own hands? The lines on your palm do not tell a predetermined fate you are powerless to change. They tell a story that begins with a perfect divine design, a story that begins with a perfect divine design. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. There is a blueprint for your life, a purpose that own and pathly made. There is a blue path, but that is not where the story ends. The secret, the glorious life, altering secret, is that there is a hand with a scar in it that reaches out to you. The hand of the resurrected Jesus. His sacrifice on the cross paid for every crooked line, every smudge on your blueprint. His blood washes away the stains, and his resurrection offers you a new beginning. When you place your life, your story, the scars you carry from your own journey are not things to be hidden in shame. They can become sources of strength, of compassion, of testimony. Just as his scars are the proof of his love for you. The path forward is not about trying harder to be a better person, to follow the map perfectly on your own. You have already tried that. We all have. The path forward is about relationship. It is about learning to walk day by day with the one who holds the true map. It is about opening your hands, letting go of your own plans, and receiving the grace and the purpose he has for you. Look at your hands one more time. They are a gift. They are capable of creating beauty, of offering comfort, of doing good work. They can be hands that serve, that give, that lift others up, or they can be hands that grasp, that give down, the choice. And he invites you today to let him take your hand and lead you home. All right, that is it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button to show your support. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.